I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. 1 year, 5 months and 5 days after the quadruple murder in the student enclave of Moscow, Idaho, the prime suspect has finally come up with an alibi. You're not going to believe it when you hear it, but do you remember the early days of this case? Kohberger was regarded with such awe. The FBI and other so-called experts were all convinced that he was a serial killer and that he'd left a trail of bodies from Pennsylvania to Moscow. Actually, though, the artifacts of this crime are more amateurish than that of a criminal genius. And now that Kohberger has finally released his alibi, we're going to go through it in a moment. Unabridged, well, it's clear just how clumsy and clunky his defense is going to be. Before we get to it, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I've been to Pullman, I've been to Moscow, I've driven the route from the house on King Road to his accommodation and back. And so I do have a sense of the area. There's also, of note, there's a park near the King Road house. We'll be dealing with that in a moment. If you're finding this analysis useful, please like, share, leave a comment. You're welcome to hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So here it is, 2 pages from the criminal mastermind himself. Mr. Kohberger moved to Pullman, Washington in June of 2022. As an avid runner and hiker, he explored many areas of the Palouse. Of note, he explored Wawa Park in July of 2022, and this became a favorite location. After the school year began, Mr. Kohberger was busy with classes and work at Washington State University, and his running and hiking decreased, they acknowledging that, but did not stop. Interesting that they've got to add that part. Instead, his nighttime drives increased. So when he stopped running and hiking, he drove more, according to them. This is supported by data from Mr. Kohberger's phone, showing him in the countryside late at night or in the early morning on several occasions. The phone data includes numerous photographs taken on several different late evenings and early mornings, including in November, depicting the night sky. Now, that's definitely quite useful for him. You know, I'm also someone who's often up at night. Is it because I'm stargazing, or because I'm working, or because I've got insomnia? Mr. Kohberger was out driving in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, so they acknowledged that, as he often did to hike and run and or see the moon and stars. He drove throughout the area south of Pullman, Washington, west of Moscow, including Wawa Park. And so what they're basically saying is that he was out driving, but he was not near the house on King Road. They're saying he was south of Pullman and west of Moscow. And so in the next section, partial corroboration, they say Mr. Kohberger intends to offer testimony to show that Brian Kohberger's mobile device was south of Pullman and west of Moscow, that Brian Kohberger's mobile device did not travel east on the Moscow-Pullman highway in the early morning hours of November 13. And I don't think that is in dispute. I think they are, the prosecution believe that he took an indirect route from Moscow to Pullman, which is also possible. And so whether he went north or south, it doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't go to Moscow via an indirect route, not necessarily the shortest route. But they do seem to be concerned he could not be the vehicle captured on video along the Moscow-Pullman highway near Floyd's cannabis shop. So that is obviously a CCTV sighting that is perhaps in dispute, certainly going to be interesting. when the trial happens to decide, whether it's legitimate or not. Now, is it really necessary to pull Stargazer Kohberger's alibi apart? Well, I don't know if it is necessary, but let's do it anyway. In order of importance, these are its 4 biggest flaws. Number 1, it took Kohberger 522 days, that's basically a year and a half, to say where he was and what he was doing, to explain himself on the night of the murders. This alone is going to look extremely bad in front of a jury. So, we've now heard the alibi. Just the fact that it's taken this long isn't a good look. Even if Kohberger had a seemingly rock-solid alibi, taking this long to provide an alibi simply looks bad. Taking this long to provide a terrible alibi is ridiculous. Does anyone seriously think he has a strong case? And guess who else took a while to come up with an alibi? Amanda Knox. We're going to be dealing with her email in an analysis later today, so look out for that. Number 2, his alibi. His alibi is that he was driving on the night of the murders to run, hike, and see the moon and the stars. In other words, his alibi is that he was nowhere in particular, which isn't an alibi. I don't know about you, but I think the defense was inspired by America's popular interest in the solar eclipse. If you think about it, wasn't that just a week ago? And isn't that where the idea came from? On the night of the murders, the murderer drove, ran, and perhaps did do some brief hiking inside and outside the house. If you've been there, you know there's some steep terrain. There are some, strange, there's some kind of interesting topography right around the house where one might, you might need to run up an embankment or, around a corner. But guess what? It would have been under a waning gibbous moon. The early morning hours of November 13 were also freezing cold. If you check the weather, and you can look at the historical weather, it was a foggy night with overcast skies, hardly the best conditions to see the moon or the stars. Number 3, his running and hiking decreased but did not stop. So this is a weakness. Based on Kohberger's Strava account, it's not clear that he even started running. Only a single run is listed, dated 4 August 2022, about a month and a half before the murders. That hardly shows a pattern. The distance, 1.3 miles, isn't indicative of fitness either. Number 4, why is he in Moscow to stargaze? And that is probably going to be the argument by the prosecution. One of the biggest problems Kohberger faces is that he's not in his own town of Pullman. Of course, that is the issue he's arguing, is that he wasn't there. He wasn't in Moscow. And so, but the prosecution are going to say, okay, maybe you're walking, hiking, and stargazing, but why are you doing it in Moscow and not Pullman? They might say, well, he wasn't there on that night, but what about those 12 other occasions? Now, the only potential strength in the alibi is that he didn't drive directly to or from the crime scene. And who knows, perhaps the defense knows something that we don't. He seems pretty certain the CCTV at Floyd's cannabis shop isn't him. Either it is him, or it's just too grainy to make out, or it's not. By the way, there's also a reference to Wawa Way Park in the affidavit. It's located west and south of Pullman, and his defense seemed to be implying that he was drawn to or hanging around that area. There is a park on the other side of the hill of King Road, the King Road house, so perhaps Kohberger is suggesting that's where he went on the 12 occasions at night, the Arboretum in Moscow, to jog and to stargaze. Whatever the case, it does seem that Kohberger was drawn to Moscow rather often, especially in the weeks before the murder. Overall, though, a bad alibi is better than no alibi at all, but as alibis go, what do you think? I think this is one of the worst I've ever seen. It's scraping the bottom of the barrel. Interestingly, though, the prosecutors recently admitted in court that Kohberger was not stalking one of the victims on social media. Does that mean he wasn't stalking any of them? Because there is a difference. Thank you for listening. Look out for my analysis on the Amanda Knox email, and I'll see you guys next time.